saw test scores go up. We also saw grades go up from that effort. Excuse me. He celebrates all of you in their political power against injustice and neglect of all people. It has truly inspired me as an educator. The streets of Newark, New Jersey are buzzing over the breaking news about Larry Hamm running for the U.S. Senate. This black man is truly the black people. Latino people, marginalized people, poor whites and blacks, union workers, immigrants, Muslims, working class, all oppressed people. However, if he is going to take a seat in the U.S. Congress as a senator, he's going to need our help and our assistance.
That's right.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce to some and present to others Larry Hamm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Praise the Lord. Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, I'm just going to stand here for a second because I want somebody to take a picture of me behind this podium. This is the most unusual looking podium I've ever spoken at. And I want to thank my brother for that wonderful introduction. Except one little issue, and that was you said I received the most affluent award. That is absolutely not the award. You look outside in my car, you'll know it's not the most affluent. No, it was most influential. Oh, most influential, yes. New Jersey, Insider NJ. People familiar with Insider NJ online? Every year they do like a 100 most influential. And I've been on that for several years, but I have never made the most affluent list anywhere at any time, and I don't mind. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be able to talk here at the Brunswick Theological Seminary. I want you to know how deeply honored I feel to be invited here to be with you for Black History Month. Let me just say a word about Black History Month, and I'm sure all of you in this room are probably devotees of Black history, and I don't have to go into a long thing about it, but most of you know that the origins of Black History Month or African American History Month, whichever you prefer, go all the way back to Carter G. Woodson. How many people in here know Carter G. Woodson? Excellent. So I'm talking to the right crowd. Carter G. Woodson was the son of enslaved African people from West Virginia. And somehow, I don't know how, but somehow, at the turn of the century, 1907, this son of enslaved people, coal miner's son, was able to go to the University of Chicago. And it was at the University of Chicago that he received his bachelor's degree and his master's degree. Now I'm going to tell you, I know how difficult it is to engage in advanced study. I went to school right down the road here. Like many of you, I was an undergraduate. I was an undergraduate at Princeton University. And I know how difficult college life is. And I also did graduate work at Princeton University. And I know how difficult graduate work is. But that was difficult in 1978. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have been a Black person trying to get an advanced degree at the beginning of the 20th century when lynching was a daily occurrence in the country, when discrimination, to use the word discrimination would really not do justice to an accurate description of what was happening to Black people at that time. We talk about apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid was here. You know, the South Africans, do people really understand this? The South Africans learned it from the United States. There was no apartheid national policy of the South African government before the beginning of the 20th century. They literally lifted the laws of racial separation from the law books of this country, and also from those of Nazi Germany, by the way, and transplanted them to South Africa. And then the system of physical separation of the indigenous African people and the European settlers, who were the first, the Boers, the Dutch, and then later on the English, that system of separation was based on what? The system of Native American reservations here in this country. Literally. I'm not making this up. We couldn't make this up. In South Africa, 90% of the people, the black people of South Africa, were literally crowded into little parcels of land, which was about 10% of the land in South Africa. These parcels were called Bantustans. But they based that system on the system of Native American reservations here in this country. So at the beginning of the 20th century, we had apartheid, not just de facto apartheid, but de jure legal apartheid, just like South Africa. It was the law. You over there and you over here, and on and on and on. You know, my grandfather, my grandparents, my friend Bill Davis just walked in, my friend of many years. I know most of you probably know Bill. He's a member of the People's Organization for Progress. And Lisa Davis, the head of our reparations committee, is here with us tonight. Give Lisa and Bill a hand. Bill has been an activist for many years in this particular community. And he's been leading the People's Organization for Progress effort down here in Central Jersey. And Lisa is a veteran member of POP, has probably been in POP for close to 25 years now. Oh, did I tell? I'm sorry.
Actually, it's funny. Probably 20 years.
So, what must it have been like to have been a black graduate student at the university? And just because it was in the North, don't think that was some kind of consolation. You know, racism was as pernicious in the North as it was in the South. You know, it's just that the story that we hear, the narrative that we hear about slavery and racism, the popular mythology is it was a Southern institution. But we know that that's not the case. It was not a Southern institution. It was a national institution. Slavery was a national institution. Slavery was not just in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama. Slavery was in New York. Slavery was in New Jersey. Slavery was in Pennsylvania. Slavery was in Illinois, and on and on and on. And its concomitant system of apartheid, of what was, I hate the term Jim Crow, because it obfuscates what was really going on. It's such an innocuous sounding term, Jim Crow. It really hides more than it reveals about the system of racial terror that our people had to endure in this country. I mean, racial terror. Lynching was just one of the parts of it. You know, just as pernicious were the daily humiliations and injustices that our people had to endure every day of their lives. My people are from Gainesville, Georgia. And, you know, there was actually a law. How many people have had discussions in your family? You're probably talking about some kind of male-female stuff, and you said he was reckless eyeball. How many people have ever been in that he was reckless eyeball? Meaning that you were looking, you know, somewhere that your wife thought you should be looking, you know. But that was a law in the South. Reckless highball was a law for which people were convicted and sent to jail. You know, you could not look a white person in the face. If you were walking down the street, now I don't know if this was a law, but it certainly was a practice. If you were walking down the street and white folks walking down the street, you stepped to the side. Remember when that young man got shot down there, I think it was in South Carolina? The officer said he looked me in the eye. Y'all remember that? Walter Scott, I think that was his name. What was it?
It's pretty great.
Well, that's Baltimore, but there was another one in South Carolina. Freddie Gray was Baltimore. And the policeman said he looked me in the eye. Well, in the South, you couldn't look a white person. You know, and this was not just down south. This was up here. You know, slavery was up here. We're here tonight to talk about reparations. But what must it have been like for Carter G. Woodson? And then when he finished at the University of Chicago in 1907, he went to Harvard University. Harvard University. He became the second black person to receive a PhD at Harvard University. Think about that. At the beginning of the 20th century, I used to cry when I was in graduate school. I used to wake up in the morning with tears in my eyes. Graduate work was so hard. I was crying. I hated graduate. You know, we had these cubicles in the lower level of Firestone University, and I locked myself in there for hours and days sometimes, working so hard. What must it have been like for Carter G. Woodson in 1912 to have been a graduate student at Harvard University? You know who the first black person to receive a PhD from Harvard was, right? W.E.B. Du Bois was the first. He received his in 1898. And Carter Woodson, I think, received his in 1912. But unlike many other academics, Carter Woodson was always trying to connect his academic work to the service of black people. He took history with the mission to do what? To destroy white supremacy. To in fact prove what people had been alleging in this country that we had in history. This is the truth. You know it. Do I have to convince you? This is what we said. This was the rationale for enslavement. This was why, you know, Bartholomew de las Casas said you shouldn't enslave the Native Americans because they have souls. But you can enslave the African because they have no souls. Did you know that about de las Casas? Now later on, he recanted his position on the African enslavement, but he held this position for a long time. See, people think this slavery thing just kind of appeared. No, slavery, the enslavement of Africans were going on in Europe long before Columbus even set sail in 1492. There were plantations on the Mediterranean. There were at least, I think Winthrop Jordan says in White Over Black, there were at least 60,000 enslaved Africans in plantations on the shores of the Mediterranean. In fact, the word factory originates with the enslavement of Africans in Portugal. That's where the word factory comes from. And this system was already in existence, and they knew it was wrong. You think they didn't know it was wrong? I'm telling you, because you know how the academic world is. Well, you have to consider that George Washington was a man of his time. You know, this is how we excuse the evil treatment of African people, the evil, some of the evil. Have you seen these pictures of the instruments of torture that were used to force the obedience of black people? Have you seen these things? These implements that were made to force feed slaves, funnels to stick down their throats, instruments to break their teeth that they refused to eat. A whole area of industry arose to develop the instruments of enslavement. Birmingham in England became industrialized in part through the production of chains and the metal bands used to make kegs to hold rum. You can read this. You can challenge anything I say, but I'm telling you where to read it. Read Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. And he'll tell you all you need to know about how enslavement developed Europe and underdeveloped Africa. And that's another book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Brown, because you see, it's a dialectical relationship between slavery and freedom. There's a dialectical relationship between wealth and poverty. Poverty is not an accident. Poverty is not an aberration. Poverty is not the result of a curse. Poverty is the outcome of an economic system that impoverishes the many and enriches the few. You can't have vast poverty without someone having vast wealth. And the more wealth you have on one side of the equation, the more poverty you will have on the other side of the equation. And so, to rationalize this kind of inhumane and most brutal treatment, I don't know, I wish I had a program that I could just stick into and I could deliver all this information at one time. What a brutal and monstrous system slavery was. And it wasn't the Africans first, it was the indigenous first. Columbus sailed the ocean, they taught us Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. You walk down South 17th Street in Newark, New Jersey, South 17th Street School is there, and in the fall, you see the little ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. It's so nice. It's so nice. Those were slave ships. And Columbus took slaves on his first, not the third or fourth, the first voyage. He took slaves. Read his own diaries. Don't take somebody's word. Read what Columbus said. He says these are the kindest, the gentlest, the sweetest, the most generous people on the face of the earth. It will be so easy to subdue them. Isn't that what he said? It will be so easy to subdue them. And Columbus literally exacted his pound of flesh. He told the indigenous, bring me a thimble. How many people in here know sewing and know what a thimble is? I don't think they teach sewing. Know what the thimble is. He said, bring me a thimble full of gold every day. Those who fail to bring the gold will have their hands cut off. Amputation, blinding, flailing. You know what flailing is? That's when you skin humans alive. Do you know that there was actually a market for human skin? And that articles of clothing and shoes were made out of the skin of indigenous people and enslaved Africans. And it required monstrous use of force and brutality. There's a book out now called Half the Story Has Never Been Told. Some of y'all heard about it. Half the story has never been. Let me tell you something. They should be so glad that our people don't really know their history. Because if we had really known what had happened to us, we probably would have burned the whole country down. And to this day, black people don't like to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Don't talk that black stuff to me. How many people had that in their own family? You come home for Thanksgiving, you trying to discuss some current event. First thing said, we don't want to talk that black stuff today. But to have that kind of a system, you had to have a rationale. Because it flew in the face of all the religious teachings of the time. Whether you were Catholic or Protestant, what was being done on those boats and in those fields, this is what troubled De Las Casas so much. This is why because he was there. He was on some of those voyages. He saw with his own eyes what happened. So you had to develop a rationale. You had to develop some type of ideological construct that could somehow justify what was being done and continue the doing of it. And that's how modern racism arises. It arose and throve with the development of the slave trade. Now, this does not mean that racism did not exist before the Mid-Atlantic slave trade. There was racism. Racism is very old. The idea that some people are superior and some inferior, you can get that right out of the Bible. As soon as people start talking about chosen people, you in trouble. I know some of y'all are doctoral students in theology, but I'm telling you, this is my opinion. As soon as you start talking about some folks automatically get to heaven and some folks don't, you got a problem. And eventually that problem is going to find its way to social conflict. But when you read Ashley Montague's Race, Man's Most Dangerous Myth, and in the opening chapter, he's reading a verse from the Greek Veda, and he says, Ram will flail their black skins. Because there was a kind of racial thing going on in India. The lighter peoples came off this step, they call themselves what? Aryan. You heard that term before, right? I mean, that actual symbol that was used by the Nazi Party, that's a symbol in India, except it's flipped. It goes in the other direction. But the Aryans came out off of the northern steppe down into England. And then people that were there were black people. How many of you know Runoko Rashid? He's researched the African presence in Asia. And you go back 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years, all black, all around the Pacific coast, went all the way to the Aborigines in Australia who've been there for over 50,000 years. So they had to develop a system of racism to say that these are not really human beings. There's something else. They're like human, but they're not human. And therefore we can enslave them. And boy, they did. You read Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Wayne. Eric Wayne said that the slave had no more space on the slave ship than a dead man in a coffin. And you've seen that vivisection of the slave ship, right? In there. And so they came up. There are 2 volumes that I would recommend. They come together. One is called Slavery Defended and one is called Slavery Opposed. And in Slavery Defended, they talk about how they developed the pseudo-scientific theories of racial superiority. How they said, well, you can't teach black people to read because if you teach them to read, it'll make their head grow out of control and then they'll fall over because their heads will be too heavy. No, really, you think I'm joking? Read is Slavery Defended. They had to come up. They used the sun, the moon, the stars. They used God. They used Jesus. They used everything that they could get their hands on to justify the enslavement of our people. Slaves, obey thy master. You know, it's strange, and I don't want to go far from the course here, but you know, Nat Turner was a preacher. And you know, it's no wonder. I mean, the mistake was when they taught him how to read. You know, that's when they failed. They should have just recited these passages to him. Well, he could read. And he read that story of how Jehovah delivered the children of Israel. He said, that's my people. You know? And you know, God in the Old Testament was not beyond using violence. He used a lot of violence and told his people to use violence. He said, destroy everything. Destroy the people. Destroy their cattle. I mean, am I making this up? Y'all are students of theology. Somebody stand up and say, Larry, you don't know what you're talking about. Sit down. Sit down with me. You don't know what you're talking about. But I don't see anybody standing up. Because you read it and I read it. And although they may not talk about it in class, you know what's going on. You do talk about it. Good. I'm glad you talk about it. But they had to come up with a system of racial inferiority. And that's why Carter Woodson went to college. So that he could be a historian and that he could bring his history to his people. So when he gets out of college, he does what? He starts writing a column for one of the black newspapers. Now, at the turn of the century, early part of the 20th century, a lot of people still couldn't read, although we had public education. And you and I both know that public education has its origins in what? In emancipation. Because when we got emancipated, what did we do? We got the right to vote. What did we do? When we got the right to vote, we elected Reconstruction governments. Those state governments in the former Confederate states, some of them even had majority black people. Some of them were a majority of the Republican Party, which would be white and black, you know, in the Republicans. It was flipped back then. The Democratic Party was the party of slavery, the Republican Party was the party of abolition, you know, and so one of the first things they did was create free public education. But Woodson wanted to teach this history, and a lot of our people still couldn't read, so he wrote this column in the black newspaper. And what people would do, they took the column to church. And when service was over, someone who could read would stand up and read Carter G. Woodson's Negro History column to the congregation. And out of that practice came the idea of Negro History. Because, you know, that's the term that we used back then, right? Negro. That's what I grew up with. You know, my people wasn't in the Black Power movement. They wasn't saying Africans in 1965. No, they wasn't saying it was Negro and colored. Because my grandmother and her sister Joan, they were like the colored people, you know. But Carter G. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro History, Life, and Culture. The Journal of Negro History, and he started Negro History Week. And what week was it? Anybody?
February.
February. Which week?
Second.
Why?
Abraham Lincoln, the president.
There you go. See, I knew Bill Davis would know this. You remember the People's Organization for Progress.
Happy teacher.
Yes. February 12th, Lincoln's birthday. February 14th, Frederick Douglass' birthday. And Woodson saw them as the two two giants of the era of the most terrible war that America has ever engaged in. What did it take to end slavery? It took a civil war. How many died? Almost 1 million. Every time they go into the history, the number gets big. When I was in school, it was a couple 100,000. By the time I got through college, they were saying 600,000. By the time I left graduate school, they were saying 700,000. But the more they studied, the bigger it is. More Americans died in the Civil War than in World Wars I, Vietnam, and Korea combined. The war was so fierce and so intense that, you know, there were religious people who thought the Civil War was the war of the apocalypse, prophesied in the book of Revelation. They thought that because they had never seen carnage like this before. I mean, in battles like Antietam and Gettysburg, you know, that's why Lincoln went to Gettysburg. It wasn't just a battle. It was like 25,000 men fell. And in those days, in the beginning of the war, they didn't have repeater rifles. They had one shot. Repeater rifle didn't come till almost the end of the Civil War. And most of the combat was hand to hand. Why do you think they put a bayonet on the end of the rifle? Because when you shot that shot, that was it. You still had to put a knife on it. You had to fight with that. 25,000 men fell. Antietam, 30,000 fell in a day. You know how many 30,000? I can't even imagine. How do you bury 30,000 people? How do you drag 30,000 bodies off of a battlefield? But that's what it took. And Lincoln wasn't winning the war. And you had the radical Republicans like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner. It was like, Lincoln, you got to put guns in the hands of black people and let them fight this war. Lincoln was like, what? Put guns in the hands of these people that we've had chained up in the front yard and the backyard. They might shoot us. But they weren't winning. They weren't winning. You know, that's why Lincoln went and got Grant. The first Supreme Commander wasn't fighting. The one who was from New Jersey, by the way, his name escapes me at the moment. But he went and got U.S. Grant, and U.S. Grant went and got William Tecumseh Sherman. Tecumseh, that's an African name. And they fought. And they issued the Emancipation Proclamation as a military recruitment document. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free slaves. I'm sorry, but they taught you a lot. I'm sorry to tell you. They lied to you. No, it didn't free the slaves. But it was an important step in the process because it was a whole process that had been going on since really the turn of the century, from the 18th to the 19th century, the process that had been going on. Remember, Britain had ended the slave trade as early as 1804. The trade, not slavery within the country, but the trade. 1804. They actually, in the Caribbean, they have an Emancipation Day. They celebrate the abolition of slavery. That's like a holiday in many of the islands down there. You know? But they issued the Emancipation Proclamation offering freedom to those men who could escape from those states, counties, and parishes. How many people in here have read the Emancipation Proclamation? Now, you can't go through college and not have read the Emancipation Proclamation. Everybody needs to read the Emancipation Proclamation. You need to demand that they read it in schools, too. You know what, let me diverse even further. I went to Princeton, right? I went to Princeton. Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro was not required reading in any African studies or African American studies course I took. Not one of Dr. King's books was required reading in any black studies course I took. Not one of W.E.B. Du Bois's books was required. Souls of Black folk, when I was in college, was on the recommended reading.
That's why you need to come up like to us.
That's right, I need to come here, right? So, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. 220,000 men joined. Black men joined the Union forces. 186,000 in the Army, and the rest in the other branches of the service. And they distinguished themselves. They turned the tide of the war. Because there wasn't the will to fight, really wasn't there. Lee had fewer men and less resources, and initially was winning all the battles. And then they issued the Emancipation Proclamation. He puts William Tecumseh Sherman in charge. And Sherman told the slave masters, I'm going to teach you the meaning of revenge. This is why when you go down south and you find yourself one night, like midnight on your travels, and you in one of them little stores, and then you the only black person, then don't start talking about Sherman. Don't start, I'm telling you, I'm warning you, don't, they hate Sherman. They hate Sherman. They hate Sherman. In Virginia, the Battle of St. Petersburg, Sherman said, go get the city council. They went and got the city council, put him up on the hill. Sherman was sitting on his horse. He said, I'm going to show you the meaning of rebellion. He burned 1/3 of St. Petersburg, burned it to the ground. Sherman is credited with the modern concept of what is called total war. That total war is like, you know, if you see the colonial movies, the movie about colonial, you know, the British stand on one side, Americans stand on the other, and then they fire, boom, they all fire, and it's over, right? Basically, or they fight or whatever. Sherman said, no, we're going to tear up the railroad tracks, we're going to burn down your granaries, we're going to burn down your factories, we're going to burn down everything that's part of the structure of provisioning your army. And that's why they hate Sherman. That's why they talk about Sherman's march to the sea. It turned the tide of the Civil War. It ended. Now, I don't know if Sherman liked black people or not. He probably was a racist. Probably was. Ulysses Grant owned slaves. To come at the head of the army to abolish slavery, owned 4 slaves. I mean, the contradictions are right. But they did what was necessary to abolish it. Lincoln was a racist. Lincoln, read Lerone Bennett's Reluctant Reformer on Abraham Lincoln. Better yet, read Frederick Douglass's speech on the death of Abraham Lincoln. No better witness. Frederick Douglass is a witness. You know, these people were racist too. The black people in the Union Army didn't even get equal pay. Let me tell you something. There's a town not far from here, Pennington. You know what they have in Pennington? They have an African cemetery. Did you know that? It's called the African Cemetery. That's what's on the sign. You know, black people in the 19th century would still call themselves Africans. You know that? That's right. Yeah. They would call themselves Africans. A lot of them had, like, the Negro thing wasn't working for them. They knew where they were from. You know? There's an African cemetery. You know why it's there? Because in the North, the black Civil War soldiers and the white Civil War soldiers couldn't be buried in the same cemetery. I noticed, I didn't say the white Confederate soldiers and the black Civil War soldiers. It was the same army, but they couldn't be buried. It was segregation from the cradle to the grave. And I was down there last Veterans Day. I woke up in the morning. It wasn't planned. I said, I'm going to Pennington. It's Veterans Day. Let me honor some soldiers that fought a war that I can really relate to. And I went down and I noticed something. A lot of their headstones had Connecticut on it. I said,
said, why would these men buried in New Jersey have Connecticut infantry on their headstone? I asked the caretaker. She said, because blacks couldn't enlist in the Union Army in New Jersey. They had to go to Pennsylvania or Connecticut to enlist in the Union Army. This state was deep in sympathy with the South. When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, the state legislature of New Jersey nullified Lincoln's power to emancipate slaves in the state. This was the last state to abolish slavery, and it was only abolished by virtue of the passage of the 13th Amendment. There were 36 states, 3/4 of the states were required. New Jersey was not in the 27-state majority to ratify the 13th Amendment. It's not even clear that New Jersey ratified the 14th and the 15th Amendments. The most active slave port was New York City. After that, it was Perth Amboy, New Jersey. This university, as you well know, was built with slave labor. The founding family of this university owned slaves. The buildings of this university have the names of slaveholders on them. I mean, it's all, that history is all around us. So, Woodson did Negro History Week. It evolves into Black History Month. And then we discovered we were from Africa. And we called it African American History Month. I mean, we knew, a lot of us knew, but you know, it took some time. I actually remember when the New York Times officially said they would use African American. And y'all remember that? And I think they said, because Jesse Jackson told me. I'm making a joke, but it's really not a joke. If you go back and research this in the 80s, you know, I can remember when we first started using African American, a lot of black people did not want to say African. They didn't want to say African Americans. We were taught to hate Africa. But as Malcolm said, in hating Africa, we hated ourselves. You can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree itself. We didn't want to do that. Winona Lippman, the first black woman state senator in New Jersey, was the one who sponsored the bill that New Jersey would officially recognize African American History Month. That was in 1971. Winona Lippman. I was like kind of a witness. I was around at that time. And woke, as they say, right? But I was around at that time. So that's the origin. So we talk about reparations. Black people have demanded reparations since the period of enslavement. Reparations, the demand for reparations is not a new demand. It was a demand that was made in the 18th century. It was a demand that was made in the 19th century, a demand that was made in the 20th century, and a demand that is made today. And probably one of the reasons that we're having this talk about reparations today is because it came up in the presidential debate. I've known 9 presidents. I go back to Eisenhower. Some of y'all don't go back that far. Some of y'all go back further. I've known 9. I know Eisenhower. Now all the ones that came after him, this is the first time that I can recall the issue of reparations was openly and seriously discussed in the presidential debate. And I think that is a good thing. Now, were there political reasons why it was made? Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons you don't hear them talk about it so much right now. Because they were like, well, what can we talk about to get black people's attention? Right. Let's talk about reparations. They know about reparations for 50 years. They ain't never talked about it. All of a sudden they're going to talk about reparations. But my position is this. Regardless of what the motivation is, we should use the opportunity to to push forward even harder the demand for reparations. The People's Organization for Progress, we endorse that slogan that had been put forward, I think, by the December 12th movement. They stole us, they sold us, and they owe us. You know, and when, you know, it's funny, like, you know, Malcolm said, you know, Malcolm was debating someone, somebody was saying, the white man don't want, I hear Negroes say this today, or I mean African Americans. Let's say this today, oh, the white man don't owe me nothing. They owe you everything. Do you know what the calculated amount, if you were to try to calculate the value of the stolen labor, and if we're just talking about colonial America, because if you talk about African slavery in the Western Hemisphere, you're talking about 500 years. You're talking about 500 years. So when people say 245 years, they only talking about the enslavement that started in the American colonies. But it was in the Caribbean 200 years before that. And a lot of the slaves that came here came from the Caribbean, because they came from Africa and they brought them to islands like Cuba where slaves were broken. You know how you break a horse? Like a horse don't want to be ridden. The horse intuitively knows that he wasn't created to carry you around. And you put that saddle on the horse will throw the saddle off, throw the saddle and the rider, so you got to break the horse. And islands like Cuba were used for slave breaking. Not to mention the enslavement process itself. Do you know, we see these pictures of the old slaves, right? Like they lived to be, most slaves didn't live past 25 years old. People were literally worked to death. Worked to death. When they discovered the African cemetery in New York, and they started doing some of the research on the bodies that they found these characteristics of the bone where literally there was no ligament there, because the muscles had literally been torn from the bone. This is how hard our people were working. Half the story has never been told. But if you were to calculate the value of the labor that was stolen, and they knew they stole this labor, like read Lincoln's second inaugural address, the address he gave in 1864 after being elected. You know, Jersey didn't go for Lincoln. Lincoln didn't win Jersey in 1860, and he didn't win Jersey in 1864. This state's sympathy was with the South. Lincoln talked about the stolen labor of the bondsmen in that speech in 1860. They knew, and they also knew that they had to do something to correct the situation. Now, initially, when the abolitionist movement started, racism was even in the abolitionist movement, and there were all these schemes on what to do with people after they were free. Initially, they wanted to send us to Haiti, to San Domingue. And that's why they made Frederick Douglass the ambassador to San Domingue. He was to go down there and see. Because initially, Lincoln was like, well, after we free, we can send them all to the Caribbean, And there were these recolonization societies. That was to send us back. But eventually, they gave up on that. And they knew they had to have a plan. Frederick Douglass said of emancipation, you know what he said, right? It was freedom to starve. Emancipate, the actual well-being of black people was quite precarious after emancipation. I mean, literally unleashed. So the plan was to do what? To give us a stable society. To redistribute land. Now, land redistribution was an old method. It's used going further back than the Romans as a form of recompense for some injustice that had been done. You took land and you redistributed. That land use is an old method. So they said, okay, we're going to make these people agricultural workers, you know, or owners, or we use the word in this country, farmers. You know, they use other words in other countries, but land. So Sherman, during the Civil War, during the war itself, with the stroke of a pen, General Order number 15, the stroke of a pen, expropriated 400,000 acres of slave masters' land. This was the price of treason, is what Sherman said. Y'all treat that Confederate flag, that's the flag of treason. They know about, oh, this is the good old boy. That was the flag of treason. That wasn't even the flag, the actual flag of the Confederacy. The one we call the Confederate flag, that's not really the Confederacy flag. That's the battle flag that the armies carried into battle. And they were fighting and dying to preserve the institution of slavery. So Sherman said, for your treason, we're taking the land and we're redistributing it to the people that work the land. And that's what he did. Even during the war, they expropriated 400,000 acres. And from that, Thaddeus Stevens, who was one of the radical Republicans, he put forward a bill, H.R. 29. And the bill passed in Congress. H.R. 29 said what? 40 acres and what? No, it wasn't. 40 acres and $50.
Where did mule come from?
I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you where the mule come from. When the federal troops moved, when the Union troops moved through the South, they began to redistribute this land. If you didn't have a beast of burden to pull a plow, you couldn't do nothing with the land. You had to have an ox or you had to have a mule. Where did the mule come from? The mules were used to pull the cannons. And Sherman said, well, these people have to have something to pull that plow. And they would give them some of the mules. They would give them some of the mules. So, he just gave me a time sign here. Let me go a little faster. Fast forward. All right. See, you made me miss my place. I was reading right here. So, the idea was real. H.R. 29 passed the House, and a version of H.R. 29 passed the Senate. But what happened? Lincoln was assassinated. It was a conspiracy. I mean, it was not alone. Stop believing these myths about lone gunmen. No, that the plot was hatched actually in Toronto, Canada. It was an office of the Confederacy that was operating in Canada. It was a conspiracy to kill. They were going to kill the whole Canada. That's why they shot Seward, I think it was. That was in the balcony there with Lincoln. They wanted to kill the whole Canada. So who comes to power? The vice president, his name was Andrew Johnson. The first president to ever be impeached, by the way. You know why he was impeached? Because he was an opponent of anything to help black people. He was a white supremacist. When he came into office, all that land that Sherman gave, he wrote writs, executive orders, to return all the land that had been given. So the record shows that people, one, know that the labor was stolen. Two, know some form of compensation must be given. Some form of repair should be given. And three, an attempt was actually started to do. And it was circumvented because of white supremacists literally within the federal government itself. More recently, in the last few decades, reparations has enjoyed a kind of a renaissance, rebirth. A big push forward came when Randall Robinson wrote his book, The Debt. Ta-Nehisi Coates more recently pushed it some more with his book on reparations. And since 1989, there has been a bill in Congress, H.R. 40, to establish a reparations commission. The People's Organization for Progress, from the time that we founded our organization, we have been in favor of reparations. And we have joined these national groups like NCOBRA and the Institute of the Black World for the 21st Century with Dr. Ron Daniels to push forward, to push for reparations. What we need in Jersey, see, let me try and wind up with this. There is a popular notion about reparations. There are individuals and groups that have been pushing and push now for reparations. But there's, in my humble estimation, there's not enough groundswell for reparations. Now, we had to put pressure on our congressman in the 10th district, Congressman Payne Jr., to get on the bill. We got like 40 or more than 40 black representatives in Congress. Not all of them are on the reparations. You would think they'd all be on the reparations bill. All of them aren't. There are white congressmen that are on the reparations bill and black congressmen that are not on the bill. You shouldn't be surprised by that, right? Look at John Brown. That was a mixed group. It was white men and black men together that raided the Harvest Festival. But anyway, what we need now, groups like this and other groups, is to build the popular groundswell for reparations. Like, number one, since the Democratic Party had reparations as a debate issue, I'm going to be pushing for reparations to be included in the Democratic Party platform when they have their convention in July. Look, y'all have these out there telling me, don't get quiet now. You know, you talking about reparations, is that important or not? Put it in the platform. We need a state reparations bill. In 2003, Assemblyman Craig Stanley actually put forward a bill that was a state version of the federal reparations bill, H.R. 40. It actually went to committee and was voted out of committee and was supposed to be voted on the floor. Then when it got to the floor, the politics. And they never put it up for a vote. So we need state reparations bill. We need to support the federal reparations bill. There is also a Senate bill for reparations. But just about every level of government should be pushed either to put forward its own reparations bill or declaration or resolution supporting H.R. 40. Because there are different levels, like we need city council to pass a resolution supporting H.R. 40. We need board of freeholders to pass a resolution for H.R. 40. We need state legislature to put forward its own, because this state had slavery. And let me tell you something. A housing program, scholarships for students, I support that, but that's not reparations.
That's right.
It's not reparations. Reparations is compensation for the stolen labor of our ancestors. And this government is giving reparations. It's giving reparations most recently to the Japanese. They got a check. You didn't hear no Japanese debate on we don't want a check. You didn't hear that, did you? Did you hear any Japanese say we don't want the check? You got Negroes walking around, we wouldn't know what to do with the check. Give me my check. I want my check. If you don't want your check, give me yours too. I'll take mine and yours. People are insane. It's like some kind of madness that grips us. It's like we want to overcompensate for what the feelings that we have about what was done for us. You know, it's just like people wouldn't support affirmative action. Now that wasn't reparations, but there was Negroes going, I don't need affirmative action, I can do it on my own. You see how many black college professors have disappeared from this campus? I'm telling you, I'm a witness. I was here in the 70s. We had more black professors then than we do now. And they get rid of the ones they have now. But I'm just point. There are a lot of people going around putting forward things that are reparations is really not reparations. Yes, do we want a housing program? Of course we do. Do we want affirmative action? Of course we do. Do we want scholarships for our children? Of course we do. But that is not reparations. Right. Reparations is compensation and repair for the harm that was done during slavery and its concomitant systems. It's not just slavery. It's Jim Crow. We deserve reparations for Jim Crow. Do you know how much wealth was taken from us or denied us because of Jim Crow segregation? We need reparations for convict lease labor. Do you know how much free labor states and counties availed themselves from taking black men out of jail and working them on chain gangs to do construction work? We deserve reparations for the forms of discrimination that result from slavery that still go on today. So we need you to take action. You all had a report that was done called Black and Scarlet, right? Scarlet and Black on this university. People got to keep that fight up. If there are monuments on this campus to people who were slave masters, take them down. Or advocate them taking them down. People got their names on them, they were slaveholders, point it out. Take it off. Don't be afraid. This country's failure to confront racism and race inequality in an honest and persistent way is why we are going backwards. But I'm going to end with that because I know people got to go to class, but I did want to take a few questions that we have for those who can stay if you want to ask some questions about reparations.
Thank Larry Hamm.
Any questions?
We're not Rutgers, by the way.
What are you now?
We're Brunswick Theological Seminary. We're an independent seminary.
Oh, you're independent from the college.
Always that.
Ah. Thank you.
Just FYI.
Right. Glad to hear. Yes.
The trauma, so the trauma of, I mean, with the psychological trauma of slavery, would that be a part of it also?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're familiar with Dr. Joy DeGroot, her work on post-traumatic slave syndrome? Yes. I mean, I actually read articles recently, and it's like established science now, that certain experiences can cause genetic damage. Epigenetic, that's right, can cause genetic damage, and some of us have medical conditions and other things that actually have their origins in the oppression of slavery. So yes, the psychological trauma, the physical trauma, all of that, we can make a case for reparations. But what we're lacking most of all, because I think a lot of the intellectual work has already been done. What we're lacking now is a strong political movement for reparations. Like the intellectuals talk about it, the activists talk about it, the college students talk about it. But they're not talking about it on church on Sunday. They're not talking about it at the union hall. They're not talking about it in sororities and fraternities. See, we need talk at the grassroots level, and then we need action. Like, it would be a wonderful thing if I came back here a year from now and the New Brunswick City Council passed a resolution in support of H.R. 40. The Middlesex County Board of Freeholders passed a resolution in support of H.R. 40. That the senator and the assembly people that represent this district have become co-sponsors of a bill in the New Jersey State Assembly to create a commission on reparations that the state of New Jersey should get. Because you know slavery was here from the beginning. The Dutch got here in 1620. By 1625, enslaved African people were here in New Jersey, clearing the land, clearing the forests, building the roads, building the dams, doing all the heavy lifting. Right here in New Jersey. Another question. Must be a question. Ta-da!
Well, I was just going to say that activists, because as I was studying about reparations, was very interesting to me to also learn that this theory that certain people pull themselves up by their bootstrap is not true at all. And in fact, the strongest piece of legislation that Lincoln passed was not the Emancipation Proclamation, it was the Homestead Act of 1862, in which he basically said, if you just live in, I forget how many acres of land, something like hundreds of acres of land, you just live there for 5 years and you have it.
Right.
And this was basically, that proposition was made to white people.
Right.
And so they had all this, and there's so much in terms of you look at the stuff they literally gave to themselves, the royal charters, this and that.
Right.
And so I think that's another myth that has to be busted wider.
Right.
And also to study in terms of the actions that the United States government took on behalf of the victims of the Nazi Holocaust.
Right.
Yet they talk something completely different when it comes to black people.
Right. Dr. King actually talked about the Land Act. I saw him give a speech. I saw a film of him giving a speech where Dr. King was talking about how America had developed an economic floor for its European immigrants. And that was the Land Act. And, you know, as you get older, you begin to put this stuff together. Because when I was a kid, I can remember seeing movies when it was the land rush, and somebody would shoot a gun, and then them long wagons would come back, and everybody was rushing to get land. But nobody talked about who land it was. It was Native people's land. They had driven them out of the east and driven them out of the south, and now they were taking their land. And that's how a lot of people that came here that didn't have nothing ended up with something because they got some land. But it was an act of the federal government. The Land Act, yes. This is where my daughter's professors here. You know, all three of my daughters are Rutgers graduates. Go ahead.
I do think that you're right on point saying that the intellectual lifting for reparations has really been mapped out.
Right.
But our problem is rank and file.
Right.
Into the rank and file. And then I think it's complicated right now because we have not done a good job about spreading this discussion into the new black communities that we have around African Americans. And
That's a real issue.
that potentially is now also derailing the conversation because I know that one of the classes I teach here is one of the few places where we explicitly talk about what does it take for continental Africans, Caribbean, Latinx, and African Americans to talk about where their common agendas are.
Yes.
Because otherwise, I find that many of these young people are coming to spaces where there's no discussion about how reparations also intersects with their stories.
Right.
And then that becomes problematic in terms of pushing it forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so I think that's maybe.
I think it's important, and I think we should have some programs on it, especially with the students, with some of the have a forum with an African student representative, Caribbean student representative, African American. If you got the Australian Aboriginal, you know, and then talk about these different experiences. You know, I was just speaking at a church. Was it yesterday? I spoke to the church in Orange. Sunday, yeah, I spoke to the church in Orange yesterday. And I was in church. Now, if you had walked in that room, you said, well, this room full of black people, right? But as I began to talk, I could see, you know, that clearly there were differences here, and that some of the folk, well, I think actually the majority of folk were either Caribbean descended Africans and African Americans. But we do need to know each other's history, just like we can talk about Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, you know, all of those. But there were Caribbean Africans that led slave rebellions. I mean, we should know their names too, because the truth be told, African Americans owe a debt to Haitians. We owe a debt, a big time debt. The Haitian Revolution pushed forward. It accelerated the struggle for abolition at light speed. Haiti was the first time in history that a republic was created by slavery. Now, when I was a kid, I saw that movie Spartacus. Y'all remember Spartacus with Kirk Douglas? See, old heads know Spartacus. The people with the gray hair, we know Spartacus. Some of them don't know. They know Michael Douglas. They don't know his father, Kirk Douglas. You know, Spartacus was a true story. It's based on the servile wars. There were 3 servile wars: servile, servant, slave, right? There was 3 major slave uprisings during a particular period of the Roman Empire. The Spartacus story comes from the 3rd servile war. He was a real person, and he actually put together a slave army. They made a big movie about it. You know, and at the end of the movie, I was crying. I was a little boy with Spartacus, and all his men were great, and they would fight, but they got beat. And in the last scene of the movie, you see Spartacus men all on crosses, all the way up the Appian Way, right? All the way up. And I'm crying. Where's Toussaint Louverture's story? He didn't lose. He won. Toussaint, Dessalines, Boukman, Pétain, I have it right? Christophe. They beat the superpower of their day. They beat the French. They beat the French so bad that Napoleon was on the verge of being overthrown. They told Napoleon, you better, because he spent up all the money trying to beat the slaves in Haiti. They said, you better get some money or you are out of here. And what did he do? He sold the Louisiana Territory to Thomas Jefferson for some millions of dollars. Like, it don't even sound like a lot of money now. I think it's like 50 million, something like that. That's nothing today, right? But he sold everything west. That's why he sold French and New Orleans. Because that was held by France. Haiti, they sold French. That was held by France. Let me tell you, Toussaint, them, they beat France, they beat Spain, they beat England. They all came at them. And they all beat them. And then he not only set up a republic, he said any enslaved person that gets here is free. And then, if that wasn't enough, he laid the basis for the independence of Latin America. Because Simon Bolivar was an outlaw. He needed a base. Was it Dessalines or Christophe? Christophe was the king. Christophe said, come here. Make your base here. Print your pamphlets, your incendiary literature here. They got a street, a boulevard, named after Bolivar, in Haiti today. See, we don't know all that. All we know is that Haiti is so poor and Haiti got all these problems. But we don't know. And once that was heard around the world. And it gave strength to the abolitionist movement because when he made that deal with Bolivar, Christophe said, every country you go to, you got to free the slaves. And all those Latin American countries had